What just broke out in a courtroom is so heartbreaking and mind-blowing that it has left the globe in shock. Stop whatever you're doing right now. Completely stunned. The world was watching, the cameras were rolling, and King was at the center of it all. Harris, the renowned T.I. King's son, dispelled all misconceptions about his father. In front of the king, Harris spoke in a voice that shattered beneath the weight of truth in a frightened but defiant court, but had a power that was impossible to ignore. He gestured toward the jurors and said the words that would start a fire. I wasn't the one. My dad was the one. The whole room went cold. The air was thick. As the globe absorbed the news, social media surged, cameras snapped, and journalists gasped. Unthinkable. It wasn't even the worst part, though. King Harris took something from his bag, retrieved a stack of tapes revealing audio that would revolutionize the situation. Not all of them were recordings. They were bomb intended to demolish all of T.I. King's constructions. The distinctive voice of T. King may be heard clearly in those recordings. Cool, serene, and clear. Dark secrets that made everyone in the courtroom shudder. Weapons, drugs, illicit activities, even for the world to hear. Bribery was exposed. The judge's voice trembled in shock as he hammered his gavel. Arrest him immediately, cops. Additionally, T. King was pulled out in front of millions of spectators. The courthouse, embarrassed and in handcuffs. Once acclaimed as a hip-hop superstar, the guy was now imprisoned, his real-time empire collapsed. However, the betrayal was much more profound. King Harris. His face twisted in agony as he fought back tears and threw the last gut blow. The narcotics and weapons in my vehicle, they belonged to him, not to me. I was set up by my father. The courtroom proceeded into outright mayhem. The wife of T. King fell apart. His companions couldn't speak, and the social media platform became a battlefield. Our King Harris, Ar's family betrayal, and Maj T.I. King revealed trended throughout all platforms. It was more than simply a controversy. This was an honest, devastating catastrophe. A son ruining the father who brought him up. A split family separate. A legacy was destroyed. In front of everyone. All eyes were on King Harris, and the chamber was dead silent as the gravity of what had just transpired set in. There was more to this courtroom drama. This was no other family quarrel. The treachery that took place in that courtroom will reverberate throughout the history of hip-hop. Still trembling resolute, King Harris stood in the witness box with fire in his eyes and trembling palms. The magistrate bent forward. Cameras panned in. Then, like a bomb, the words fell. I wasn't the one. My dad was the one. T.I. King. Nobody moved for a second. The air was filled with gasps. Reporters rushed, attempting to record each and every word. The jury's hearing was so abrupt that they were hardly able to process it. A son revealing his dad. Nobody has ever seen something as gut-wrenching as this. King Harris, however, wasn't finished. Not even close. He inhaled deeply before removing his covert weapon, a pile of secret tapes, recordings that were never meant to be heard. The anxiety was high as the courtroom personnel rushed to the first sound came on. The voice of T. King himself was there, as distinct as day. Calm, self-assured, reckless. T.I. King said on the video that he had hidden weapons, moved drugs, and even sums of hush money to protect his reputation. It shook the courtroom. Individuals, some fainted, some gasped, and still others were startled into stillness. Notifications flashed on phones, and in a matter of seconds, the leaks had become well known. The truth about our T.I. King, our family betrayal, and our King Harris inundated social media. The judge smashed his gavel, shocked yet angry. Take him, officers. Taken into custody. In front of millions of onlookers, T. King was hauled out of the courthouse right then, exposed, bound, and humiliated. In a couple of seconds, a legend was diminished to nothing. However, the worst was still to come. The narcotics, the firearms, the ones they discovered in my car. King Harris said in a mumble as he faced the jurors, his voice quivering. My father set me up, therefore they weren't mine. They belonged to him. Worse than the audio recordings. It was more than a simple exposure. It was the ultimate kind of treachery. A parent who is prepared to ruin his own son in order to protect himself. Chaos broke out in the courtroom. The wife of T. King let out an incredulous cry. King Harris sobbed wildly as his pals disintegrated and he fell into his lawyer's arms. Social media went up in smoke. King Harris was being called a traitor by half of the supporters, who believed that a son should never turn on his father. The other half praised his bravery in revealing the truth, even at the expense of his family, and praised him as a hero. However, additional secrets came to light just when it appeared that everything had settled. According to leaked sources, these recordings covered more ground than simply firearms and narcotics. They included dubious discussions with senior infamous gang leaders, politicians, and law enforcement insiders. There was more to T. King's double life than that. He belonged to a network that had the power to destroy the industry as a whole. This was no longer only about family. This has to do with survival, power, and corruption. An online frenzy sprung out. Millions of people watched videos that broke down every word in the released tape, of views in a few hours. During a live discussion, news presenters questioned if T. King's whole career had been one huge lie. Words like monster, phony, and betrayer were used on social media by fans who had previously praised him as a hero. The emotional burden was too much for King Harris to bear. The world observed a young man who was having difficulty controlling himself. In front of the one who gave him life and tore him apart, they stood together. He did not stage his tears. It was not for the cameras that he broke down. He murmured with a broken voice. Tears. He was meant to keep me safe. Rather, he ruined me. This wasn't just another breakdown by a star. In front of millions, this family was on the verge of disintegrating. A distraught and broken son who revealed the worst secrets of his father. Additionally, T. King's dynasty fell apart in front of the world, and his legacy was destroyed. Hip-hop circles and whispers started to swirl. What was the duration of T. King's dual existence? How many dubious transactions had he been involved in behind the scenes? The most terrifying question is, how many more would fall now that these tapes have been made public? The atmosphere within the courtroom spiraled out of control. Ty King's wife had to be carried after fainting in shock by paramedics. Reporters and his closest companions yelled about cover-ups and conspiracies throughout their altercation. Protesters gathered outside with some demanding justice and others standing up for the deceased artist. Nothing stopped the mayhem from spreading into the streets, even though the police had to send out more units to keep the mob under control. King Harris, meanwhile, sat still, shattered but unmoving. He was aware of how much his activities. He was aware that the internet would accuse him of betraying his own blood, name him a traitor, and call him a snitch. However, his comments reverberated more globally than any story when the camera panned in on him one more time. If being honest makes me the bad guy, then so be it. Instead of being adored for a falsehood, I would rather be loathed for the truth. His confession was just starting to get out there when the live feed terminated. Crazy hypotheses erupted on entertainment blogs. Legal professionals hypothesized that T. King may be facing decades behind jail. In the comment areas, fans became ruthless groups and tore each other apart. King Harris stood in the middle of it all, not as a villain or a hero, but rather as a devastated son who made the decision to truth above blood. The treachery alone was not the real tragedy. It was the then there was stillness. Fans began to doubt what they believed to be true due to a deafening silence. Family, fame, and loyalty. Because T. King's arrest wasn't the only thing at stake. This was the breakdown of a lie-based dynasty, the death of legacy, and the loss of trust. Additionally, as the Globe reenacted the after repeatedly listening to the tapes, one indisputable fact became evident. This was just the start of the controversy. The world had never witnessed anything like the repercussions from that courtroom explosion. The arrest of T. King wasn't only a headline, it was an empire's collapse. One of the most potent hip-hop overnight, names went from legend to criminal. And the fuse was lighted by his own kid. The mayhem outside the courthouse escalated into a full-scale conflict. On the streets, hundreds of supporters battled. There were shouts that King Harris had sold out his father, committing the ultimate treachery. People cried out that he had done something that no one else had, the having the guts to do, so revealed the scammer who had been lurking in plain sight. Along the walkways, police officers pushed back waves of Free Ty King, Justice for Harris, and protesters as chants reverberated into the night. News organizations worldwide looped through the released tapes. Every phrase is broken down, every pause is examined, and every little detail is emphasized. People were most surprised not just by the confessions of weapons, narcotics, and bribery, but the informal manner in which T.I. King discussed stifling critics, bribing authorities, and concealing behind his notoriety. Millions had previously found hope in that voice, but now it was the sound of his demise. Within his detention cell, according to reports, King lost his temper and burst. According to sources, he cursed and yelled at the guards, asking to see his attorneys, that someone had put him up. However, his empire's defenses had already started to fall apart. Former colleagues shared their own startling tales. Bodyguards, former managers, and backup dancers, each someone with years of silence, finally got the confidence to speak up, and the videos appeared tame after what they disclosed. Claims of money laundering, the use of hidden assets as hiding places, and even connections to criminals who were formerly indestructible. It was more than a controversy now. This was an empire of criminals, disintegrating in real time. King Harris, meanwhile, was huddled in a hotel room away from the media flurry, away from the chants and cameras. However, peace did not come from isolation. He gazed at his pondering, shaking. His phone kept buzzing. Death threats from irate admirers. Networks have offered to market his tale. Friends' messages pleading with him to remove the recordings. He disregarded them all. His quiet was more powerful than any words of the commotion around him. Harris, behind closed doors, was unraveling. He admitted to his attorney that he had gone days without sleep. He was plagued by the sound of his father's voice on the records. He remembered the venomous expression in T. King's eyes as he was taken away in handcuffs, not with affection or remorse. King Harris was not the son of Ty King for the first time in his life. His adversary was him. It was presented by the media as the pinnacle of Shakespearean tragedy. A son confronting his father, a father whose own lies are causing him to crumble. However, the suffering was more profound within the family than any headline. Devastated and humiliated, T. King's wife accused Harris of ruining their family name. On Instagram Live, cousins and family members referred to him as a snake, a traitor, and a shame. Some even said that competitors had bought him off to overthrow his father. And just when everyone believed that there was nothing more, another bombshell dropped. Darker, another audio leak was discovered. This time, it has nothing to do with firearms or narcotics. It was much worse. The voice of T. King, icy and calculated, was discovered talking about payments to politicians, his close relationships with high-ranking authorities, and his contacts to influential people who had apparently shielded him for years. It turned out to be a nuclear weapon, and it exploded all over Washington. Senators called for inquiries. It was deemed by activists to be indisputable evidence of widespread corruption. The T. King controversy had, for the first time, moved beyond the realm of hip-hop and into the core of American politics. The internet took off. Conspiracy theories, memes, and heated arguments filled each podium. Everybody had a viewpoint. Was a genius who had deceived the world for decades? Was T. King? Was it all a huge setup, or what? A son plotting the murder of his own father? Harris remained silent for all of this until in an unexpected turn of events, he went live on Instagram that night. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and his face was pallid. Evenings. Breathless, the entire globe listened. He didn't grin. He remained still. His voice broke, raw with emotion, as he only murmured, "I never wanted this, but I couldn't keep living a lie." He talked about years of being silent while carrying secrets that weren't his. He described how, while feigning to be a global role model, he saw his father ruin everything he touched. He then confessed through tears that, "I loved him, but he loved his empire more than he loved me." That live the internet was disrupted by the stream. Millions of views were accumulated in less than an hour. Celebrities voiced their opinions, with some endorsing Harris as being called a coward by others. Emotional arguments were rife on talk shows. Rappers from the A-list joined the discussing their personal encounters with the evil concealed beneath T. King's grin. However, only when people I didn't think the night could go any worse, but it did. A third recording was posted by an unidentified user a few hours later. Compared to previous ones, this one was more gloomy and dark. It contained a voice that was definitely T. King's was overheard talking about how to permanently silence people. The ramifications were terrifying. Corruption and narcotics were no longer the only issues. The music might be shaken by the murder, power, and cover-ups that were involved. Industry at its heart. An online frenzy sprung out. If accurate, it wasn't almost time for jail. The world was going to see how deeply T.I. King's hands were stained with blood. Engagement in illegal activity occurred. According to reports, Harris broke down in tears when he heard the third tape. He said he never wanted the public to hear it from his lawyer. Fearing it would harm his reputation, he had pleaded with the prosecution to bury it. Everything. The storm, however, was now uncontrollable. By dawn, helicopters hung above the courtroom. The streets were crowded with demonstrators, some holding posters calling for Harris's justice, while there was more than just a protest as others yelled, "Free to King!" It was a civil case. Battle of devotion and treachery waged with tweets, luck, and fury rather than firearms. Within his cell, T. King declined to eat. he muttered to himself as he silently gazed at the wall. Protect claimed that the betrayal of his own kin, more than the law, seems to have shattered him. And one reality became indisputable as the world watched. It was more than a father and son. This represented all that was corrupted behind the celebrity, the sparkle and the glam. The disclosure was not the only catastrophe of Part 2. It was the breakdown of confidence on an unprecedented magnitude. Because this was more than simply a hip-hop historical moment. History was being rewritten in real time. The courtroom had turned into a combat zone. The globe was split by the time the trial started. Devoted supporters shouted on one side that T. King was not guilty. However, irate demonstrators called for life in jail. Because of the extreme security, snipers or bomb squads were positioned on roofs, searching every car, and journalists had to go through many inspections before they could access the building. The tension within was oppressive. At the defensive table, T. King sat bound, his once dominant presence diminished to quiet. His kid was on the other side of the room, his eyes bulging with anger and betrayal. Even though King Harris avoided looking at him, the weight of that glance was too much to bear. The man who had reared him now viewed him as an adversary, which he was in many respects. The courtroom roared when the prosecution aired the first leaked footage. The air was filled with gasps. The jurors' lips were covered. The judge even took a moment to incredulity. Every word was an arrow, not only demonstrating guilt, but presenting an image of a man who has constructed his empire based on murder, threats, and falsehoods cash. However, the rail explosion occurred when the third recording, which Harris possessed, was introduced and pleaded to remain buried. The sound of the words reverberated through the courtroom's stillness, intends to witnesses consistently, casually discuss violence that passes for business. Ty King's attorneys vehemently protested, asserting that the recording was fake. However, with a shudder, Harris stood and spoke the words that should never be spoken by a youngster. My father's voice is that, and I would want to thank God it wasn't. The room went cold. Ty King, shackles clanging, he sprung from his chair, his anger exploding. He forgot his words. Amid the confusion, but his rage didn't need to interpretation. Bailiffs hurried outside to keep him in check when the court ordered order. The last straw was reached. A monarch deprived of his crown, undone by his own blood, not by adversaries. The trial involved more than simply the facts and testimony. It turned into a theater. The former T. King supporters turned against him, admitting fear purchased years of allegiance. Bodyguards acknowledged that they were hiding offenses. Cash transferred according to associates inside duffel bags. A former producer started crying and said, "I kept silent since I cherished his music, yet I unable to remain silent when lives were ruined as a result." The jurors paid attention, pale and appalled. The more they listened, the more obvious it became. This wasn't merely a controversy involving celebrities. This was planned. Criminal activity. Wearing high-end clothing. The streets exploded outside. Admirers clashed with demonstrators. Officers clashed with gangs.